The feeling when you enter this church is one of instant reverence and awe. It's one of the most beautiful churches in Canada.
You walk in here and it's magical. You feel a connection with the past. You feel a connection with God. You feel a connection with your community. It's this almost unexplainable feeling that you have when you're in here of peace and solace and connection.
For me, what sums it up is the ceiling of Assumption Church. It takes me into another world every time I look up.
This is where Catholicism in this part of the world took root and began to grow.
It is a rock and anchor of the city.
This is a family. It's important to our well-being and our hope. Our hope is here.
When I think of Assumption Church, I think of a day many, many years ago. I might have been 6 or 7. And I went there with my dad. And I don't have very many memories from that time. But he took me to Assumption Church. And I said, "Why are you going here?" And he said, "Paul, this is one of the great historic sites of your country."
Standing at the entrance to Canada at the busiest international crossing in North America, Assumption Church has looked out over the Detroit River since 1845, making it one of the oldest Catholic churches in Ontario still in use until it closed its doors in 2014. But Catholic presence in this area goes back much further. Founded in the middle of the 18th century as a unique community of European and Indigenous Christians, the parish of Our Lady of the Assumption was the cornerstone of Christianity in all southwestern Ontario, a witness to wars both at home and abroad, and the founding of 2 great nations. This parish is a model of survival amidst conflict and change, a testament to the living faith of 2.5 centuries of Catholic Christians. We celebrate our beginnings. Our Lady of the Assumption was the first parish founded west of Montreal in what is today Canada, as a mission originally of St. Anne's in Detroit, but the first one and the oldest one. So every single parish in Windsor and Essex and all of this region is born out of this parish.
And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, the first settlement took place during the French regime." And I said, "Where was that?" He said, "It was across the river in Detroit." I said, "The French were there with the Americans?" And he looked at me and he said, "I've got a lot of trouble with this, son. I'm going to have to explain a little bit of history."
In 1701, Antoine Lomé de la Motte-Cadillac built Fort Pontchartrain du Détroit, now the American city of Detroit, Michigan, in order to protect French fur trading interests from the English, and he encouraged indigenous tribes to settle nearby as trading partners. Among these were Hurons, who had welcomed Jesuit missionaries in the previous century. Although the French had their parish of St. Anne inside the fort, the Hurons had no one to see to their spiritual needs. At last, in 1728, Jesuit missionary Father Armand de la Richardie arrived to establish the mission of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary among the Hurons.
How many years did I labor without winning any souls? When I came, I did not find even one barbarian who professed the Christian faith. Indeed, I myself, forgetful of the depth of divine knowledge, was almost ready to leave, thinking that the hope of promoting the glory of God was dead. While my discouraged spirit hovered amidst such uncertainty, the kindness of our Savior appeared. Under the impulse of divine grace, the work of God so flourished that scarcely 3 years later, not even one pagan remained among the whole people. As for the present, a barbarous people seem to profess the faith with unfeigned heart. the sacred edifice scarcely contains the multitude of Christians.
In 1747, the mission moved to what would become its permanent site at a place called La Pointe de Montréal, directly across the river from the fort, and the inhabitants began to call the area l'Assomption, French for the Assumption. Gradually, French-Canadian settlers began establishing themselves on the south side of the river near the native settlements.
When I was first assigned here in 2013, I came here with some comfort because I knew that my mother's grandparents were Assumption parishioners. My own parents had been married here. What I didn't realize is that my father's ancestors, who had been in River Canard since 1760, were actually married at Assumption Church. And I just discovered that one day when I was looking through the marriage register. I come up with my great-great-great-great-great-grandparents were married at Assumption. And in fact, prior to Assumption being built or established in 1767, they would have been parishioners at St. Anne's in Detroit. And so within my own family, I got to understand what it was, what it meant for this church to be established here on the south side of the river, to serve the French-Canadian families who had been here for so many years, but without any sort of services, church services right here for them. And the barrier that would be there crossing the river to get to St. Anne's.
Many of the French-Canadian families living on the south side of the river began worshiping alongside their Huron brothers and sisters at the Jesuit mission. In 1765, they petitioned the Bishop of Quebec for their own parish at l'Assomption, and 2 years later, their wish was granted. During the early years of its existence, the members of Assumption Parish not only dealt with poor harvests and the deaths of 2 of their pastors, but wider historical events, including several wars, also affected the parish. Over time, the Huron community moved west, and the parish experienced an influx of English settlers into this largely French-speaking society. When the American government finally took possession of Detroit in 1796, the inhabitants of l'Assomption found themselves cut off politically from their parent community. The following year, the township of Sandwich was formed, which was later incorporated into the city of Windsor, Ontario.
But then he said to me, understand, there are very few parts of your country where the French regime, the British regime, the border between Canada and the United States, the Catholic Church, your church, all came together in the way that this wonderful church is.
In 1763, when all hope was lost, the community itself stood up for its fellow man and literally smuggled food and provisions over to the fort of Detroit. We were outside the fort, and the French people that were here literally smuggled food into the British fort for the survival of those people. And yet, you know, you look through a history book and you would be unaware that, you know, the French were willing to help the British. This is where you have that idea of, you know, you are your fellow man. If our ancestors could do that back then, we can do that in the future for our fellow man today.
You learn so much by being close to people who are in need. And I think that it's been a real blessing that I spent my deacon time here at Assumption, given its great commitment to service and to the service of the poor. It's really a primary part of the role of being church. The mission of Christ in this part of the world is being realized, has been realized here for 2.5 centuries, and it's exciting where that's going to continue in the future.
I think people are very devoted to this parish, partly because of its history, because it's been a consistent message now to the people of this region and beyond for over 250 years. It's a place where anyone in the community can go where they need help. It's this symbol of peace that you would see when you first come over the bridge and see this landmark when you come over the water. And I can imagine if we went back in time to the beginnings of the parish, that you'd come by boat and you would see the early church on the water as well, and you'd see that first tower.
In 1845, a new Gothic church opened its doors to the Assumption community. With its tall spire reaching heavenward, it is an emblem of faith and hope.
It's just a mesmerizing experience as soon as you come in. Every time I come to Mass, I feel the Holy Spirit inside me.
Oh, it's just so precious. I mean, the architecture and the pictures and the Stations of the Cross.
It's beautiful. The angels up top.
When the first Bishop of London moved to Sandwich in 1858 and claimed Assumption Church as his cathedral, the Jesuits left both the parish and their brand new school. But this hardship heralded the beginning of a new era in the life of both. In 1870, 29-year-old Father Dennis O'Connor of the Congregation of St. Basil, who would later become Bishop of London and then Archbishop of Toronto, arrived to take charge of the parish and the college. A few weeks after his arrival, he wrote to the Superior General of the Basilian community.
You know the ill success that has hitherto attended this place. It would seem a curse has been over it, and this thought really terrifies me at times. However, I am here, and I will do my best, and I hope with the blessing of God that things will go better now. Now you will ask, what are our prospects? I answer candidly, I think they are good. If you accept the little dislike that persons generally have for change, priests and people received us well, and give us every encouragement, both here and in Detroit.
His optimism was not misplaced. The Basilian Fathers have remained at the parish to this day, and under their care, the school that Father O'Connor took over with its 34 students has grown over time to become the University of Windsor, welcoming over 15,000 students to its campus each year. Although the university is now a secular institution, Assumption Church still plays a significant role. There is truly a unique relationship between Assumption Parish and especially Assumption Church and the University of Windsor. First of all, of course, Assumption University was born out of the parish, and that was the founding institution for the University of Windsor. But far more than that, the physical presence of the church at the edge of the campus, really within the campus, states that the church is present to and interested in the students at the University of Windsor. We are here, open to them, ready to serve them. Back when the church was open, the 7:30 p.m. Mass, which was the student Mass, was the most filled, the most crowded Mass of all our celebrations on a weekend.
You need that grace, that community, that family that'll get you through the week, knowing that you can come back into that. You can be centered and focused and home for that hour or however long you're here and get yourself ready for the next few days.
These are difficult times, and I think Assumption Parish was a real beacon. It was a real rock for some of these students that are just being overtaken in a secular education facility and a very secular society that we're living in.
The past century of the life of Our Lady of the Assumption Parish has continued to be one of change, witnessing a great expansion of the Catholic community, both in numbers and in diversity, as the population of Windsor grew in the early 20th century due to the burgeoning automotive industry and also immigration from Europe, necessitating the creation of 3 more parishes in the Sandwich area.
I grew up in Windsor after, really, I was born in 38, but I was 6, 7 years old when the war ended. And there was the massive waves of immigrants and refugees who came from Europe. And they came to Windsor, so that if you were my age, your friends were from Eastern Europe, they were from Western Europe. They were of massive diversity. It was an incredibly rich place to grow up. You could not grow up disliking your fellow man. You could not grow up ignoring what the world was all about. They built a society, incredibly rich, and I grew up with that. Those were my friends. Windsor was, in my opinion, the ultimate in modern Canada.
The long history of Assumption Parish has been one of change and adaptation, and the 21st century so far has continued this trend by presenting the parish with new challenges.
The new reality is in some ways a return to what was, which is all of this area of Windsor is united into one parish. It's been challenging though, because for so long we had seen ourselves as 4 different parishes with 4 different places of worship. So it's been a time of trying to foster the unity that we have as the one people of God.
The historic Gothic church is in urgent need of restoration, and in 2014 the decision was made to close the church to regular use. Early fundraising efforts have stalled, leaving the community with a sense of uncertainty regarding the building's future.
Of course, we say that the church is about the people, it's not about the buildings. And while that's true, buildings also do play a role in how we see ourselves. It's almost like saying, our family can be a family anywhere, and your house that you live in doesn't really matter. We know that's true, and yet the house really does matter. But there's an added dimension here at Assumption, and that's the historical nature of not only the parish, but also the church building. And there's probably no greater symbol for any church community than the church, the place where it worships. So it's been especially troubling for the people that their church building closed. And if you've seen it, it's a beautiful church.
It's not simple enough to say that this church is just mortar, brick and mortar. I think that it rises to the level of a shrine, that people who come here are influenced, they're elevated in their spirituality, they're elevated in their daily lives just by virtue of coming to the church. And I think that makes this a very special place, and a place that is important to not only the parish, but to the Windsor community.
Assumption Church is needed here because it's an icon. It's the city. This is where we basically started with a community. And then this beautiful church was eventually built, and it's known all over. We were in Indiana one year, and people said, "Where are you from?" We said, "Windsor." They said, "Oh, Assumption Church." So we're known. It's an icon for the city.
It's home. It's always been my home. It holds a special place in each of our hearts, I think.
Father Bill Regal, who was one of our pastors, used to tell me that he would come into the church in the evening sometimes, and he would go up to the walls of the church and he'd put his hand on the walls. And he could feel the generations of family celebrations that had happened here, of those important days in our lives, the baptisms, the weddings, the confirmations, all of those things that had happened over the centuries that resonate throughout the community.
I've been in the parish for a long time. My mother actually was baptized in this parish, and eventually in 2006, when she passed away, her funeral mass was here. And also my grandparents are in the graveyard, the cemetery, right under the bridge, which is the Assumption Cemetery. My kids were both made their confirmation here and their first communions and their baptisms, as well as their weddings, and their children were baptized in this church too. When I come back here, I just see my family. I just remember all the faithful people that have been at Our Lady of the Assumption Church.
My father's funeral was there. And it was an incredible occasion. And I kept thinking, he loved that church. He loved Assumption Church. And this is where he would want to have been buried. He would want the ceremony take place. So I took my sons and I explained to them the same history. And of course there was a history for them as well, because Sheila and I were married in Assumption Church. And so there's a long connection between my family, the church, the Basilians, and our country.
In August of 2017, the parish marked its 250th anniversary with a special outdoor Mass for the Solemnity of the Assumption, celebrated on the grounds of the historic church.
Know that you are welcome. This is your parish, this is your home, and you're always, always welcome here.
And although the church's doors are currently closed to services and to regular visitors, they opened again to welcome the hundreds of people who came to celebrate this historic occasion. When we celebrated the Feast of Our Lady of the Assumption with the outdoor Mass and saw so many people, there were, I would guess, 600 to 700 people present, and I anticipated 3 or 4 maximum. I was overwhelmed by the response from people and by people who came from so far away. I was deeply humbled to be a part of this whole story, but also it made me realize how important this place is to so many people around Ontario.
And it was so powerful, because yes, we were at a tent, but there were so many more people than we even expected to show up, that we had people flowing out beyond the tent. I thought that was pretty powerful as well. And I think it also spoke to the power of place. People came here today because of the place where this happens, because place is sacred, and this is a sacred place. I was also thinking about how, we're celebrating our 250th Jubilee. 1/8 of all of Christian history took place right here on this place in this parish. And that's pretty phenomenal.
For the community itself, it literally says we have a purpose. We know who we are. We are planted to this piece of property. This place provides us with that purpose, and it literally celebrates who we are within the spiritual connection to this place.
We were here for the last Mass celebrated in the actual church, in the actual Assumption Church itself. And it was a hard day. It was a sad day. And effort that goes into a day like this, and a reason to bring everyone back onto these grounds and to have a chance to look inside this church, it means so much to so many people. And it keeps alive a lot of that remaining hope that people have, that maybe one day the church will open itself again, but if not, we're still here.
To see all those people here told me that they recognize the need for this church to be here, for this community to be here, for this hope of the future being here. And they all wanted to come and say, basically, here we are, bring it on. We're ready for it.
In order to keep this memory alive, we need to certainly remember what this church means to everyone, and to continue to pray for its survival in the community. It's an important aspect of the community, it's important for the parish, it's important for our own children as they move forward to have this connection and rootedness in their faith.
As a community, we can pray, and as a broader community outside of Windsor and Essex County, Ontario and all of Canada, we can stand up and we can say that we want this parish, we want this church to survive. This is a historical location. It is very special, it is magical. Let's stand up and be heard.
While the fate of their beloved church is unknown, the members of this unique and historic parish continue a tradition reaching back to their French-Canadian and Huron roots of maintaining a strong and vibrant Christian presence in the midst of an increasingly diverse society. As Pope Francis states in Evangelii Gaudium, the parish is not an outdated institution. Precisely because it possesses great flexibility, it can assume quite different contours depending on the openness and missionary creativity of the pastor and the community. If the parish proves capable of self-renewal and constant adaptivity, it continues to be the church living in the midst of the homes of her sons and daughters.
The future I see for Assumption Parish is one of longevity. We've been around longer than Windsor. We've been around longer than Canada. We're celebrating our 250-year anniversary, and that speaks volumes.
For me, the parish has been always centered around Jesus Christ. So for me, wherever Jesus is, I want to be there. So the building, as much as I love Assumption Parish, I mean, even when we came in, just the smell, you know, it smells like home, you know, it feels like home. But when it was time to move, I was just happy to have a place to go to celebrate Mass. And the Basilian community has always given us very good priests, preachers, teachers, friends. So I trust that when they say it's time to move, we moved.
And I know that we have a yearning for this building that's next to us. I have a yearning for the community. It would be lovely to be here, but wherever the people are, that's where I want to be.
I hope that Assumption Parish is able to continue doing what I've been trying to do for the last 2 years, which is solidify the community, solidify the people who worship here, because they truly are the church, no matter what building that they worship in.
Even though we are not in our historical church at this time, we're attempting to create a vision for this community that will lead us into the future.